Hi, I'm Sarah Higgins. I'm Ruminant and Equine Veterinary Manager with MSD Animal Health. And today we are here on Conor O Sullivan's farm outside Navan in County Meath with Frank O Sullivan, the attending veterinary practitioner from Pat Farley and Partners Veterinary Clinic. This is the second video in our 4-part video series in the March Animal Health series. So Conor, could you please just give us an insight into how you got into farming and also the system that you have here?
I returned home to farm in 2015 when quotas were abolished. We started off milking 120 cows. Over the past few years we've built that up to about 220 cows. It's 100% spring calving, and we try and calve as compactly as possible in the spring and get cows to grass as soon as possible.
And Frank, as the attendant veterinary practitioner, we're going to discuss calf pneumonia, but I think a really good place to start is at the beginning. So colostrum management. Can you highlight the importance it is to get that element right?
Yeah, so look, Conor well understands the importance of this, and we've recently tested through bloods looking at IG levels, tested his calf colostrum on random calves, and it's been very good. So that shows he's got the principles right, which is 3 litres within the first 2 hours, and he also is harvesting the colostrum in a hygienic way, storing it in a cold fashion and feeding it out immediately. So, you know, there's signs of it here, not only in the readings we got, but also in the health of the calves. So Conor, you have how many calved at this stage?
We have 140 calved now after 5 weeks of calving. Okay,
so 140 calved in 5 weeks, that's not only a challenge for managing the transition of those cows and the key for the rest of the season, but also he's that, you know, to manage those calves and in terms of nutrition and preventing disease as well. It's a huge challenge for you, Conor.
Yeah, as you said, the main thing at the start is colostrum management, and after that it's getting calves penned up as quick as we can into the groups that they stay in until weaning.
So, like I know on this farm and in practice in general, Sarah, one of the main challenges we have is with calf diarrhea issues and the range of things that can cause that, and maybe calf pneumonia is probably equally as important, and that's the same for Conor. I mean, so he looks to get his nutrition as, you know, optimal as he can, good quality milk replacer, well bedded, plenty of meal, plenty of water, so you know that's working well for him at the minute, and we can see that from this. This is not a new shed though, Conor, is it?
No, we've no purpose-built calf housing on the farm. This is one of 3 sheds that we use on the farm. We've adapted it as best we can for the job, but it's far from perfect. Yeah.
So this shed here, Conor, that we have behind us that you've adapted into the calf shed, how many are currently housed?
There's about 60 calves in the shed at the minute. That seems fine now as the calves are small, but as they grow it'll start to become slightly overstocked as the calves get older.
And what's your plan then? Will you move to other sheds, or do you maintain these groups as they are? We maintain these groups as we are. What we might do is take one of the groups out and find alternative calf sheds for them around the farm. But we'll try and maintain the groups as they are and possibly give them a slightly more space as best we can. I just, as well, Frank just mentioned earlier there about nesting, and I can just see the excellent straw bedding underneath.
Yeah.
That's a vital component, because even like right now, it's not in the thermoneutral zone or the optimal temperature for calves, which in Ireland it's between 10 and 25 degrees, and you can see there how comfortable the calves are. You can't see their legs there with the level of nesting, and that's a really, really important factor in controlling disease, and in particular pneumonia in calves.
Yeah, because I mean, the temperature last night was -3 around here, and those calves, I mean, you said their optimal temperature is over 10, between 10 and 20 perhaps, for calves less than we say 3 weeks of age.
Yeah.
So they accommodate. I mean, Conor feeds a little bit extra milk at this time to give them extra energy, but he also beds them very regularly, and it's fantastic to see the way they nest. So they lose most of their heat through their feet, and now we can see that the calves are all nesting down. It's almost like a little duvet around their feet, and that's a very good, it's nice to see that. The other thing I like about this shed is that it's an old shed, but the southwest is at this corner here, so Conor has allowed some air to come in over the top of the calves. So it's not at ground level, it's well over the calves, and it's allowing that clear out.
And avoiding the drafts.
Avoiding drafts.
Which is vital as well.
Yeah. So Conor, you suggest there's, do you think there are too many calves here, or is that or what's your opinion at this time?
Yeah, I think calf space is in and around the 1.7 metre squared per calf, which is, I think, just about okay. I wouldn't like to go much more than that. And ideally in the future, purpose-built calf housing is something we'll do in this farm, probably this summer to relieve some of this pressure.
I think Conor was right to identify, though, as they get older, because you're going to have all that urine, you're going to have the feces, and they're going to be maybe drinking milk, and it's going to be harder to keep this environment as it is now. So, and he suggested, I think correctly, that at that stage you might have to move groups on to different facilities or different houses. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, that's what I'll probably do, yeah.
Is there also a slope in that shed?
There is,
There appears to be from here.
Yeah, I think it's a 1 in 20 slope from the back of the shed to the front,
Yeah, so that's allowing drainage, and then I suppose you're going to get less ammonia build up, and also they're not lying in that damp bedding as well, which is vital.
Yeah, and he's got the drinkers at the front as well, so that helps to prevent, if you like, extra, overspill, or calves are going to urinate at the front of the pen rather than at the back of the pen. So there's some of the good aspects, and indeed, he's got some bales at the end here that Conor, what's the purpose of them, or when do you put those up?
Just a windbreaker, and they're easy to move whenever we want to clean the shed out. We clean the shed out every 2 weeks, and we bed it roughly twice or 3 times a week, depending on when they need it. And bales are just a handy windbreaker that's easy to move. The calves seem to do well there.
Very good. And so what other preventative strategies are implemented here on this farm against calf pneumonia?
Well, we vaccinate at anywhere from 1 day old to 2 weeks old. Frank will touch on that a bit more. He does up a herd health plan for me each year.
Yeah. So Conor has calves coming in here thick and fast. So to keep track of things, he uses the bovolus intranasal vaccine that you can do the calves from a day old right up to maybe a week or 10 days old, depending on what's coming in. So it means, I think, you're happy that the pen is all completely done, isn't that it, Conor?
They're in pens of 15, so as a pen is full, I vaccinate all calves in the pen, so I can keep track of what is and isn't vaccinated as time goes on.
And that vaccine, Frank, it's just important to note that it covers 2 of the main viral culprits associated with viral pneumonia in young calves, such as these here behind us, RSV and PI3.
Yeah.
I think the intranasal vaccines have been a game changer, because we would have seen that by calves were getting sicker with the pneumonia much earlier than we previously thought. So in unvaccinated herds, especially herds where stock were mixing or maybe buying in calves if they were feeding
Stressful
calves.
events.
Yeah, the stress, and then you'd find they're getting sick after 2 or 3 weeks of age. So by getting in earlier, and the intranasal route is that localized protection where you're stimulating the localized immunity in the respiratory tract. So the calf is a ready-made defense, if you like, from a very young age. And, not only do you not lose calves, but we know that there's such an impact on growth rates if you can keep that subclinical infection away. In other words, stop any bit of the lungs getting damaged, because that's going to affect the production of the calf at the end of the day. So that's worked for you, Conor, fairly well so far.
Yeah,
I think.
It seems to be working very well. No major problems this year so far, and I don't expect to have any more problems. I think they have up to 3 months cover with the vaccine.
12 weeks, yeah. So you're getting them through that high-risk period.
Yeah,
and optimising their immunity, essentially.
Yeah, and part of the plan, we see that at the end of the 12 weeks, it's probably necessary to extend that cover, and we have part of the vaccination plan, Sarah, would be that they're covered all through the summer then with booster vaccinations, and even into the previous autumn and winter by pre-housing vaccination. But so it's a whole plan for the year, and it's essentially, Conor doesn't have time really to deal with disease outbreaks. Is that fair?
Yeah. We don't have a huge amount of labour on the farm, so any problems we can solve before they happen is far better for us. I'd always try and prevent a problem from happening rather than deal with it when it does happen. So vaccinations are a big part of the plan on this farm.
Yeah. Does that mean you're going to be playing football again this year, Conor. He's thinking about retirement, but maybe, what?
Yeah, might play a bit.
Oh, very good, very good. Okay.
Conor, this year so far, thankfully, you haven't had any cases of pneumonia in calves. But Frank, if you're called out to a bunch of calves or a batch of calves with the classical clinical signs of pneumonia, what are they that you see?
Probably running temperatures if we check them. If we look at they probably have a nasal discharge and sometimes a crustiness in the eye. And then when we study the calf, you can see that little pant. Now, it's not very dramatic, and you certainly hear with the stethoscope, but you can see that little pant on the calf. So when we come across that situation, we always make sure to check many calves in the pen, because there's going to be certainly one or two that are acutely affected, but there are others that maybe are incubating, and then others that maybe have been through it, even with a subclinical infection. Now, when that happens, we might be forced to treat with some anti-inflammatories and then use some maybe antibiotics if they're secondary invaders, because that's, and we like to do some diagnostics. So we like to take some nasal swabs and, send them off and see what are the respiratory pathogens involved. So we normally send them to Farm Lab, but they do a PCR for, as you mentioned, the RSV, PI3, but perhaps others like Mannheimia or, and mycoplasma these days as well. Yeah, and coronavirus as well, yeah.
And you just mentioned there about the subclinical. I think it's important to the farmers are aware that the ones that you're called out to, they're only the tip of the iceberg, really, aren't they? In a batch of calves.
Yeah, that's correct. So, how many calves per pen here, Conor?
There's 15 calves per pen.
15. So if, for instance, we had some calves here affected, or say 4 or 5 calves sick in that pen, I mean, we fully expect that there are others in that pen or the neighbouring pens to be affected. So, we're not going to treat all the house, but we certainly would have to treat some based on and then we would look at, maybe what are the background causes, look at the ventilation again, look at the bedding again, and even look at our vaccination program and see what else can happen there. And as well as that, we'd often go back to the colostrum story, because Conor looks fresh now, early March, but what's he going to be like maybe in the middle of April when he's another month of pressure and, maybe the colostrum story has slipped a bit. So it's all about getting through that intense period and recognising in the second half of it is a real challenge. Yeah.
And the infectious pressure could be increasing over that period.
It could,
with the numbers.
It could do. And then, I mean, you mentioned the subclinical, but that's the great unknown. I mean, what impact does it have on that calf's production or lifetime production? I mean, it's something worth considering, and even that alone is perhaps thinking about from a vaccination point of view or from a colostrum management point of view and so on. It's the whole picture, and it's the whole prevention. He hasn't time for big outbreaks of disease like this that could happen. As Conor says, it has to be a prevention basis for him to enjoy his farming and to farm successfully. That's what I would say, yeah. So we well recognise there's an impact on the calf in terms of sickness or even death. Then there's that subclinical story, and I'm not, so what impact does that have on the calf's lifetime production? Or, what do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, well, it's been shown that both clinical and subclinical, they have massive repercussions for the long-term impact on productivity and ultimately profitability for the farmer at the end of the day. Okay. From a clinical point of view, heifer calves that have one bout of respiratory disease in their first 8 weeks of life will have a reduced yield in their first lactation up to 525 litres, and they'll also have a delay in the start in their first lactation. And from a beef point of view, I think probably more interestingly is the subclinical cases can take 33 days longer to finish versus those with none, and clinical cases can take nearly 2 months longer to finish.
Yeah,
so there, as I said, it's massive impact on productivity.
Yeah, so we've seen that in the summertime, where 12 weeks cover now with the intranasal, but we need cover during the summer because these calves go to grass. There can be periods of pressure, weather related perhaps, maybe nutrition related, and that's why we're now inclined to cover the calf for the entire year rather than just that 12-week period. That's necessary. So our biggest call in the summertime is, my calves are coughing, it's June, July, Is it lungworm or is it respiratory viruses? That's our big challenge. So we're intent to block off the respiratory viruses by, say, using the likes of Bovipast as a booster through the summer, and again, possibly pre-housing. Equally, we have to have that differential diagnosis of lungworm in the back of our mind. How can we manage that? You know, and we want to use the medicines, of course, appropriately and prudently, but not too often either. So Conor would, you know, part of his plan is to allow them get some exposure to lungworm and then, you know, intervene at the correct time. So that's the story.
And I think as well, those coughing animals during the summer, they can have co-infections. They could have lungworm present, but also viruses or bacteria elements.
That's right. And I mean, it used to be the case that all our lungworm cases happen at the end of July. So we'd be coming home from Leinster finals in Croke Park, having beaten the Dubs. But now that's changing. I mean, it's very much a September, October lungworm story. And and that's because of extended grazing, maybe even a bit of climate change, longer grazing seasons. But, you know, that RSV challenge needs to be managed throughout the summer. And, you know, so Conor would be, I mean, you're weighing your calves fairly regularly.
Yeah, we weigh once, I think, at 6 weeks. We weigh again at weaning, and we weigh again midsummer.
Okay.
So we try and avoid any sort of problems during the summer because it takes a lot of energy and time to get the calves up to the breeding weight. You don't have a lot of time to get them to breeding weight the following May. So we try to avoid any and all setbacks that we can.
And I think the point is that all the foundation for that platform, getting to breeding and production, is that you avoid the problems here by the mixture of management, nutrition and vaccine. And it has to be said, the other advantage is this, Conor, is, you know, we're using less antibiotics on the farm. I mean, that's more and more important now.
Absolutely, with antimicrobial resistance now.
Yeah.
It's very topical. And
yeah, and the consumer wants that. You have to recognise that. And, you know, calves are healthier too. The welfare is much better. I mean, look at those calves at the minute. They're just having their little sleep now after jumping around an hour ago. But it's lovely to see them. Yeah. You know, it's a pleasure to work with them. And you know, you'd find the stress of sick animals is not something you look forward to, Conor. Is that fair?
No, absolutely not. There's nothing worse than coming and seeing animals not thriving or not doing well, so we try and avoid all those situations.
Yeah.
So it's really great to see your preventative strategies are working really, really well so far in the calving period.
Yeah, well, it's very early yet. Problems tend to crop up in April rather than March, but yeah, hopefully you get through it okay.
Yeah, so I think that's a fair point. It's an evolving story. I mean, it's never the same. It's not something you can write a template for and have it for the year for every farmer. I mean, the dynamic is important, and that ongoing conversation is important between farmer and vet especially, so we can read what's happening, read the changes and manage them appropriately, be that through medicines or vaccines or through management practices. So
it's farm specific really.
It is.
Yeah,
and
that's why it's important to engage with your own vet.
Yeah, that's what we enjoy. I mean, it's much more the vet and the farmer. I think the farmer doesn't want to be stressed with sick animals, and the vet doesn't want to be treating too many clinicals either, because the outcomes can be poor, and you want to avoid that. So it's a good story all round.
To finish our discussion, we have a few questions from the audience. So Frank, I'm going to ask you a few questions if that's all right.
Okay, that's fine.
So one of the questions is, are calves that have scour early in life more prone to getting respiratory disease or pneumonia?
Yeah, I'd say the answer to that is yes. We often get co-infection, if you like, respiratory disease, and the reasons could be, I mean, it could be a common reason of maybe colostrum issues at the background of it all. You know, calves with diarrhea the bed tends to be wetter, so you tend to have more risk factors for respiratory disease, and also you have that immunosuppression that you get with a scour. So the answer would be yes, you can get both together, and it makes the management more difficult. You know, it means you have to manage the sick calves and maybe isolate them and not let them spread disease as much, and maybe attend to them with electrolytes and maybe even IV fluids. So that's a common thing we have to deal with, unfortunately. Yeah.
And another question from the audience is, in the face of an outbreak, can you vaccinate a batch of calves with pneumonia? Yeah,
well, that's a key question, because they're not always all healthy. So when we meet an outbreak, we certainly are very careful about treating the sick calves, But then we look at the cohorts and we say, look, it might be no harm to get in here with a vaccine. The intranasal vaccine works very well there because of its quick onset. I mean, if you like, well, or less than a week by the time you get an immune response. So that's usually time enough to protect those other calves. So again, yes, we would use the intranasal vaccine, if you like, to ring fence in the cohorts. We're a little careful about using it on a sick calf because the data sheet would advise against that. You know, so it's kind of on a judgment basis, essentially.
Case by case.
Case by case, yeah.
Thanks very much, Conor, for having us here today, and also for Frank also here. And I appreciate it's a very, very busy time both for farmers and vets, so we're thankful for that. Thank you for tuning in to our second episode of our March Animal Health series, and please join us next week for our series on coccidiosis in calves.